Hello everybody. I'm going to record some more of this lovely book. There you have it. Can't see it so much on the actual video, but that's okay. Chapter 15, Sand Through Open Fingers. By the time Lena got in touch, the rift between Arun and me had mended. She invited us for lunch at their country club and chatted with us more openly than before. It felt like she and Dad had decided to reverse their earlier rejection of our relationship and see us through a rough period as a new couple. Start that over again. Chapter 15, Sand Through Open Fingers. By the time Lena got in touch, the rift between Arun and me had mended. She invited us for lunch at their country club and chatted with us more openly than before. It felt like she and Dad had decided to reverse their earlier rejection of our relationship and see us through a rough period as a new couple. Whenever we met up with her, Arun was charming, self-possessed, and engaging, and she welcomed the connection with us. On her last visit to our home before we moved to the south, Arun had prepared his signature spicy shrimp dish, and she opened up about Dad. She was concerned about his repeated business setbacks. Time and again, he threw himself wholeheartedly into a highly lucrative opportunity, working for years without payment, only for it to crumble at the last minute. I'm sad for him, not for me. Arun listened with attention and responded to her concern. Someone might have left a jinx there. I might be able to help you, but you will need to follow my instructions exactly. Otherwise, his luck will get worse.
Let's stop that. I'm sure the mic's picking that up.
Alexa, stop. Guess having my noise canceling on wasn't the best.
How many things have you recorded already with that?
2 minutes.
Oh, that's not terrible.
Thanks.
I've got everything downloaded. I'll start putting everything together when I get home.
Okay.
Walk to coffee.
Will you bring me a chai?
Huh?
Oh, you're going to Airedale's house.
Yeah. Love you.
Love you. Chapter 15, Sand Through Open Fingers. By the time Lena got in touch, the rift between Arun and me had mended. She invited us for lunch at their country club and chatted with us more openly than before. It felt like she and Dad had decided to reverse their earlier rejection of our relationship and see us through a rough period as a new couple. Whenever we met up with her, Arun was charming, self-possessed, and engaging, and she welcomed the connection with us. On her last visit to our home before we moved to the south, Arun had prepared his signature spicy shrimp dish, and she opened up about Dad. She was concerned about his repeated business setbacks. Time and again, he threw himself wholeheartedly into a highly lucrative opportunity, working for years without payment, only for it to crumble at the last minute. I'm sad for him, not for me. Arun listened with attention and responded to her concern. Someone might have left a jinx there. I might be able to help you, but you will need to follow my instructions exactly. Otherwise, his luck will get worse. She pondered his words and wondered whether a former employee who had left their apartment unwillingly when it ceased being an office might be behind his spell of bad luck. She agreed to Arun's intervention, and he went there the following day. After surveying the place, he confirmed the presence of something untoward, smeared blood on the inside of the main doorframe, and instructed Lena to leave the stains untouched for 3 days. But when Dad returned from a trip early and saw the marks, he was furious with her for succumbing to idle superstition and demanded that she clean the blood immediately. Arun heard the news and shook his head. That's what I get for trying to help. His situation will be very bad. I worried for Dad, though I didn't believe his fate depended entirely on the ritual. Like my distrust for playing the lotto, something held me back from magical thinking, and I couldn't help but think Arun had set Lena up for failure, in the same way his efforts on Mom's behalf had backfired. Then Tao made an appearance. He visited from time to time through Arun's body, but unlike his host, he was unaffected by alcohol. In his calm and comforting manner, he acted as the mediator and spoke of Arun as a hot-headed child. I trusted his wisdom and told him about the confrontation between Dad and Lena over the ritual. He shook his head. Your father will never change. He was the same last time also. I stopped and stared. You knew him?
Sorry, trying to be quiet.
I messed up anyway.
Love you.
Love you. I stopped and stared. You know him? He paused for a moment. Yes, he was my father too. You were my sister. He smiled gently. When I came down from the mountains, you took care of me. I owe you a lot. I was stunned by the revelation of our former closeness. Where were we? I expected him to say China, the land of the Taoist stories. Benares, you lived there. Arun had never mentioned the holy Hindu city, nor suggested a visit there. You were a rich woman, a widow. Our mother died when we were young. Our father was a fraud back then, too. Growing up without a mother must have been lonely, as would being a widow. Perhaps that was why Arun had taken pity on our neighbor raising 2 children on her own. She reminded him of me. Arun said terrible things will happen to Dad. He will never change. Whatever money comes to him will flow out of his hand like sand from open fingers. He opened his palms and splayed the fingers in the air. I warned Arun not to interfere, but he wanted to. He cares about you too much. The first time I received correspondence from the bank addressing me by my married name, it looked odd. I hadn't requested the change, but the bank had assumed, perhaps after the joint car loan, that I shared Arun's surname. I hadn't considered changing my maiden name before, but transitioning from Dad's daughter to Arun's wife was appealing. I would make my bond with him even more explicit and take control of my adult life. Dad's name came with baggage I would prefer not to carry. Like when one of the few American students at INSEAD, an imposing woman in a tight-fitted skirt and heels, had marched toward me in the cafeteria and said, "Are you related to Roger Tamraz?" "Yes, he's my father." She pursed her lips. "I almost lost my job because of him." She had been working in Washington at the time of Dad's Senate hearings relating to his large donations to the Democratic Party. He hadn't been found guilty of wrongdoing, but she made it sound as if I was responsible somehow. I didn't know how to respond to her, and she walked away. It had been the only incident in the recent past, but who knew when someone else would link up. Can't pick up stitches and knit at the same time. And read, rather. It had been the only incident in the recent past, but who knew when someone else would link us up and expect me to explain what I didn't know? I was a working woman now, soon to be responsible for a team. It was time to adopt my new identity as Arun's wife. In Valbonne, an island town on the French Riviera, our life changed. After a failed attempt to teach me to drive the Legend, Arun took me to and from the office, a 15-minute journey. We lived in a house on a large plot, and I had hoped that the new scenery and gorgeous sunshine would uplift his mood. But within days, gloom descended upon him. Despite the brand new building, terracotta floor tiles, and spacious open-plan living area, he said the wooden doors were flimsy and the construction was cheap. Tao drank freely from the bottle of newly discovered pastis, the local anise liqueur. Tao drank freely from the bottle of newly discovered pastis, the local anise liquor. Tao drank freely from the bottle of newly discovered pastis, the local anise liqueur, but after he left, Arun was groggy and worn. At work, my team was challenging, and the work needed to implement a better process took time and effort. At home, Arun's somber state seeped into my mind, and I felt weary and alone. When I didn't respond as he expected in bed, he renewed his pointed interrogation and questioned my affections. I knew better than to respond to his demands for explanations and deflected his harangues while willing the moment to pass. My husband was a paradox, a yogi with deep otherworldly knowledge, and an irate man I couldn't please. One evening, though it looked like Arun, a different being came to pick me up from work. I realized right away something was off. The spirit in his body didn't utter a word, apart from the occasional grunt, and drove at a constant high speed, even through sharp winding turns. Although he seemed in control of the vehicle, I clung to the door until we reached the house. Once we were inside, Arun returned. He shook off whatever influence had been inside him moments earlier and looked at me apologetically. Sorry I couldn't reach you in time. When Mom and Sabby came for a visit, I was not only glad to see them, but also welcomed a break from Arun's moods. He drove us to the neighboring cities of Nice and Monte Carlo, places Mom remembered from summer holidays when she was married to Dad. She must have noticed the smell of marijuana in the house because on her last day, she expressed concern. She had read that sustained use was linked to paranoia, and while the four of us sat at the dining table, she held up her hand and asked him to promise her to quit. He held her delicate fingers and looked into her eyes. I promise. I could tell he had no intention of honoring his promise, and when I questioned him later, he said, "She should have never asked me that." He had already told me his hierarchy of loves. First Baba, then me, then marijuana. I had scraped above his love of weed. Mom might think she could reason with him, but Arun didn't listen to anyone, other than the elders, and of course, Baba. For me, his smoking was a relief. Without it, he had too many jagged edges. To pass the time on the weekends, we went to flea markets, and Arun invariably returned with antiques he deemed valuable. Marble-topped silver cutlery, a brass angel-shaped lamp. I trusted his instincts and didn't want to halt the only activity he enjoyed. But despite my salary increase, we struggled to make ends meet. I felt like I had lost my simple mountain man. But then he looked at me with a warm expression and said, "Being with me hasn't changed you, Joe. You're still the innocent girl you were when I met you." His words validated my efforts. For a moment, I was his student again, rising to the challenges of the material world, working to sustain our life together. My morning meditation was my true calling, the place I had discovered thanks to him. It kept me whole. Why would being with him change me? 3 months after our move to Valbonne, Arun announced we needed to leave. There was no future for us there. I should ask Richard to relocate us to the UK. I didn't see how I could make this request so soon after our arrival. So he wrote an email to Richard himself. It was unconventional for a spouse to contact an employee's boss, but Richard read his message, and when I explained that we were unable to settle in the south of France, he agreed to sponsor our move to the UK. I'm going to record a whole bunch of chapters today. And then I'm going to do absolutely nothing for the Chapter 16, On a Knife Edge. Just before Christmas of 1999, 4 months after our move to Valbonne, the last of our boxes were delivered into a narrow house in Maidenhead, a town 30 minutes west of London. We had exchanged an open-plan house for a small end-of-terrace house with derelict rooms at a higher rent. Cold and wind replaced the mild Mediterranean winter. As Arun ran out to the moving truck, shirtless despite my warning of impending illness, a feeling of hopelessness overtook me, and I heard the words in my mind, "The UK will not be your final destination." We spent the holidays alone, sitting on the new navy blue leather couch Arun had chosen. He had a heavy cold and blew his nose repeatedly. We watched a Bee Gees concert in which Celine Dion joined the band to sing Immortality. The description of a love beyond the reach of time spoke to me directly. In contrast to our home, my campus office was bright, my colleagues eager and welcoming. My work had progressed well after the initial headaches, and in January, I had to travel to the company headquarters in California, where an inside team was developing a new sales commission system. The order of the business hotel, the perfectly made up bed with crisp white sheets, the breakfast buffet, the walk to work in the sunshine, and the chats with my American colleagues lifted me from the pressures of my home life. And I stepped into Arun's charmed existence in California before his exile to India. By my second trip in March, Arun put me in contact with a young man he had befriended in prison. He had met Ron in the weightlifting yard and encouraged him to take up Aikido when he got out. Ron not only followed his advice, but became a master. I couldn't wait to meet someone from Arun's past who would share firsthand knowledge of his life before Rishikesh. All I knew was what he had told me himself. Ron would flesh out the story. We made plans to have dinner at a restaurant near my hotel, and he arrived with an older mentor. The two men sat across from me, and we fell into easy conversation. Ron's eyes lit up when he spoke about Arun and how his life had changed since they met. His gratitude and appreciation were palpable, and as we neared the end of the meal, he told me he had been so fascinated by his experience with Arun that he questioned people who had known him in LA. Some people thought he was a god. Others said he was a devil. I wasn't surprised. Arun was charismatic, but not everyone saw beyond his brash persona to the good of his spiritual work. Not even the man responsible for introducing him to his future clients. Arun met Bikram Choudhury in LA in the late 70s, long before he became famous and copyrighted his hot yoga secrets as Bikram Yoga. Back then, he let Arun sit in a corner of his modest yoga hall and attend classes for free. From his place of observation, Arun came across the elite who would become some of his earliest massage clients and building blocks of his business. Arun described Bikram as a man with a huge ego. When I told him he was going too far, he didn't like it. Power went to his head. Distinguishing his own style of influence, he said, "I am a kingmaker, not a king." After some time, the two didn't see eye to eye and parted ways. While I had been in California, Arun had gone to India and returned with a deal. His son-in-law, the same one we visited with his daughter in Delhi, offered to make him a partner in an attractive agricultural project. He needed £20,000 urgently to secure his investment. I was surprised that he had committed the money without consulting me and without checking that we could obtain a loan. But the prospect of developing an income in India was appealing. Perhaps this was how we would leave our dead-end life in Europe. Our current bank refused the loan, and Arun was distraught. If we didn't come up with the money in the next few days, the opportunity would be lost. I found another bank more amenable to foreign clients and secured a short-term loan, in exchange for our custom. I didn't like seeing him so upset, but equally, he had brought the pressure on himself, then made it my problem. My trips to California had reminded me of the quality of life in the US, and I longed to move back. I had been away 3 years and missed my culture and the proximity to Mom and Savvy. My vision of Arun with a successful massage business didn't match with how he behaved in the UK, whiling away the afternoons sitting in front of the televisions, drinking a few bottles of Hobgoblin ale. I knew better than to show concern, but his mood was spiraling down further than in Valbonne. Something had to change. I hired an American lawyer I found online. He specialized in complicated immigration cases and would review Arun's case for a reasonable fee, then present his findings over a 30-minute consultation. On the evening of the meeting, Arun and I huddled over the phone, listening intently to his advice. He spoke gently but firmly and reiterated what we had previously been told. Arun had no chance of returning to the US with his criminal record. If I were you, I would build your life in Europe. My belly hollowed at the news. My mind sank into the emptiness of our life. Arun made no comment. There was nothing to say. That spring, Mom asked if I could help her find new tenants for her apartment in Paris, a spacious 2-bedroom on the 8th floor of a modern building. A balcony ran along the large open space living room and overlooked the green expanse of the Bois de Boulogne and the cluster of towers at La Défense. The property was in my name, but she had managed it since her divorce, and I never considered it mine. Shortly after we'd been to Paris to show the place to real estate agents, Arun traveled to India again. And when he returned, he had a new ask, 150,000 euros to pay the balance of his agricultural investment. I froze at the sum. He insisted that the deal was good and he didn't want to give up his deposit. But my former enthusiasm about his drive and plans in India turned to anguish. Why did he have to be so rash? And how on earth would I come up with that kind of money? The apartment in Paris He mentioned the apartment in Paris, but I didn't understand the connection. It's yours, I corrected him. Mom had raised Sabby and me on her own. Whatever she earned from the apartment belonged to her. He dropped the topic, but brought up the money he owed every day. His persistence and anxiety over losing the deal filled our space. I couldn't think of anything else. I understood the requirement to pay for the land, but couldn't fathom how he had made a commitment before securing the funds. Living with him felt like a ticking time bomb. I also knew what he wanted me to do and came up with an idea. Sabby had turned 18 and had just graduated from high school. The apartment was currently empty. What if instead of finding a new tenant, we sold it and split the profit between Mom, Sabby, and me? Mom, who had benefited from it until now, would receive an inflow of cash and be free of the hassle of managing a property abroad and finding new tenants. I called her and shared my thoughts, and to my surprise, she agreed. We met in Paris later that summer, and she selected the pieces of antique furniture she wanted to ship back to New York. They had been in her family or dad's since they lived in Egypt. I have enough yarn to do this. I could sell or keep whatever was left. I breathed easier, knowing I had found a solution that worked for everyone. Back in Maidenhead, we moved out of the dark terraced house to a spacious standalone home close to the town center. The rent would claim close to half my salary, but something had to change. The lack of light and gloomy decor was affecting our mental health. Tao made an appearance in our new home on a Saturday. He opened a bottle of Hobgoblin and took a sip as diagonal sun rays pierced through the living room windows. His gaze settled on me, and he asked how I was doing. I told him about Arun's investments in India, my hope for a future there, and our plan to sell the apartment. He set the ale on the coffee table. Why are you selling it? We need the money. Why don't you borrow it? I explained my duty to Mom and her need for the money. She doesn't need it. She's been using it to support us for years. She spends like there's no tomorrow. She'll never have enough. I took a breath, observed the contours of the low inbuilt rock shelf on the opposite wall. Tao continued, Did you ever wonder how the apartment came into your hands now? He paused, light flickering in his eyes. I've been working hard on the other side. I shouldn't do it, but I care about you. Was that why he hasn't visited for a while? She should have given it to you when you turned 18. I corrected the situation. Tao's caring paternal tone eased the tension. I'd been feeling. Tao's caring paternal tone eased the tension I'd been feeling, but when he left, I was torn by his suggestion and consulted with Arun. He agreed it was better to keep the apartment and borrow against it. I wasn't so sure. Arun kept up the pressure about sending money to India, but I still couldn't bring myself to contact my bank in France and ask for such a large loan. He didn't give up, and finally, I spoke with my advisor about it. She had no authority to decide on loans of that amount and scheduled a meeting with the branch director in person. We made the trip in Fontainebleau. We made the trip to Fontainebleau and sat in her box office while a mustachioed man in a dark suit squeezed in beside her. We explained that we wanted the money to build a retirement home in Rishikesh. The agricultural deal had fallen apart, but Arun had reinvested his deposit into a plot of land where we would build our home. The director listened intently, then said, I don't like this project of yours. If I were you, I wouldn't do it. He paused and stared into my eyes. But if you're set on it, I'll approve it. On one condition. You never come... But if you're set on it, I'll approve it. On one condition. You never come back here asking for another loan to invest in India again. I absorbed his stern warning in silence, not quite believing he had agreed to my request, not wanting to say anything that might change his mind. A week later, the paperwork to manage my apartment was done, and I had the money in my account. With Arun's encouragement and support, I had managed to secure unimaginable funds, just in time to transfer them to India. But I had no idea how I would explain my actions to Mom. Despite Tao's assertions that he had intervened on my behalf, I had betrayed her trust. There was no way to change that fact. I didn't bring up the topic of the apartment sale until she asked casually how things were going. I had to come clean. I decided not to sell it. Should I rent it again? I'm going to keep it. What do you mean, keep it? It's in my name. Yes, someday it will be yours. You should have given it to me when I turned 18, I murmured. If you hadn't suggested selling it, I wouldn't have stopped renting it. I felt selfish, but this was my opportunity to build a life in India. Tao was right. Mom wanted for nothing. She had a luxurious lifestyle on Fifth Avenue and spent without counting. Our conversation ended at an impasse, and I didn't hear from her again for days. Then on Sunday, Dad phoned and spoke to me with strained concern. Your mother is worried about you. Oh, yeah? She told me you took the apartment from her. It's in my name. I'm 27 now. She should have given it to me when I turned 18. But it's not yours to take. I bought that apartment. Mom's dad bought it. He only paid the deposit. Who do you think paid for the rest? It belongs to me. Then why did you entrust it to me? So you could have it someday, but not now. Dad didn't hold any property in his name. If he had chosen me, it wasn't from care, but opportunism. You used me, Dad, then and always. His tone sharpened. You're stealing it, Joe. That's all. My hands trembled on the receiver. I don't think we have anything more to say to each other. His voice sent a shiver down my spine. He had sounded confident. Mom hadn't been in touch for a while. What was going on between them? I had the passwords to their emails and decided to check their accounts. I went upstairs to the computer and started with hers. She still had the same password, and after scrolling through a long list of unread marketing emails, I came to a message from Dad. The subject line was intervention. The air hitched in my throat as I read the context. He was telling her about a cult specialist that his business associate, the same woman who had read Arun's case files, had found. They would have a family meeting with him, then decide on their next move. I was also able to access Dad's account and found more personal correspondence with the same woman. I ran downstairs where Arun was watching television and stood next to him. Barely catching a breath, I said, I can't believe it. How could they? He muted the sound and looked up. What happened? Dad contacted a cult specialist. They're making plans to ambush me. I can't believe them. I hate them both. Warm tears filled my eyes. They had stood by my relationship with Arun when it suited them, but now that I was asserting my legal rights, they wanted to prove I was in a cult. They were willing to hurt me and ruin my life for money. I dialed Dad's number. I never thought you would stoop so low. What is it, Joe? I found your emails. I know what you're doing. Through a veneer of calm, tension laced his voice. You pushed things too far. Just because you're not getting your way, you think I'm in a cult? You're not the person we knew, Joe. That's not how we raised you. I forced myself to slow my speech. You used me when it suited you. I'm not going to let you use me anymore. This ends our relationship right now. I hung up in sobs. Arun opened his arms. Come, sit here. I huddled into his warm body. They're upset, that's all. They don't like you standing up for yourself. My voice quivered. They have no right. Money corrupts people. I struggled to take full breaths. They're shallow and materialistic. He rubbed my back. You're the only one I care about. I won't let them win. I wiped my eyes. Tomorrow, I'll call a lawyer. Man, run out of yarn. I'm going to have to redo this all over again. And that is sad. Chapter 17. I'll die here. I phoned Mark, the only French lawyer I knew, the following morning. Although he was Dad's lawyer, Dad owed him a large unpaid bill, and I trusted Mark's advice. He sounded unconcerned by my revelation and responded in a measured, calm tone. I wouldn't worry about it. They'll struggle to prove you're not in your right mind. I didn't worry about my parents' plans again. Over the Christmas holiday, Arun and I went to Rishikesh and stayed at an ashram in front of the Ganges, close to the plot of land he had bought. It had been over 3 years since I'd been back, and I relished the return to the peaceful environment we both loved, where I could indulge my spiritual practice. I noted my meditation experiences in my journal, seeing the elders as black shadows or light tremors from holding my breath and the locks, and shared them all with Arun. He livened with interest and offered new instructions or advice. Here, on the banks of the Ganges, in the shelter of the hills, he was free of the demons that pursued him in Europe. When he took me to see the plot, an open corner with an open view over the river, I pointed out a small Hindu temple. "I wanted this for you," he said. "We would have our own place of worship." How did he know me so well? I was overjoyed. On our return to Delhi, we had a dinner at a restaurant with his son-in-law. He knew about the loan against my apartment in Paris, and I told him I was thinking about selling it, repaying the mortgage, and bringing the rest of the money to India. His face opened into a wide smile, and his eyes bulged with characteristic brightness. "I don't think it's a good idea. Don't sell that place and move the money to India." He sounded sincere, like he had my best interests in mind, despite the benefits to Arun's family if I brought additional funds to India. I weighed my dislike of debt with his conviction and decided to heed his advice. It was an inspired call. Back in the UK, Arun was as despondent as ever. The developments in India hadn't altered the monotony of his existence. The daily afternoon drinking and the naps that transported him to the other side continued as if nothing had changed. We didn't have a car and spent the weekends walking the Maidenhead High Street, where he stopped at charity shops, sifted through bric-a-brac, and brought home the objects of his fancy. We attended an auction in a neighboring town and spent significantly more on what he deemed to be valuable antiques. Caught up in his enthusiasm, I joined him in bidding, and we ended up paying for all of it by credit card. When I realized my mistake, I re-entered all the lots at the next auction and made up for some of the loss. I suggested to Arun that we move to India. There was nothing for us in the UK, but he questioned my logic. "What will you do there?" "I don't know. Teach, I guess." "What will you teach? Excel?" He wasn't convinced, but I was at a loss. I took comfort in his continued focus on yoga. He spoke often about the true practice that led to a clear mind and a better life. He also wrote his thoughts. "All problems in life are our own creations. We create them because of greed, selfishness, by lying, or various disturbing thoughts." His words and teachings inspired me to keep striving for the golden state of enlightenment. But in his everyday life, his only diversion seemed to be buying objects. But in everyday life, his only diversions seemed to be buying objects. When he discovered a jeweler in the neighboring town of Windsor, he was excited to take me there and show me a unique women's antique watch. It was dainty and impractical, a diamond-studded dial with daisies inlaid with precious stones on either end and gold-colored straps. But once again, I couldn't resist the pull of his enthusiasm when he asked if I wanted it. I took out my credit card. He decided he wanted a solid platinum chain for himself, and we returned to the jeweler. The man smiled in surprise at the request. He didn't have such an item, but could fashion a bespoke piece if we brought him the metal. Arun agreed. Then the jeweler asked if he realized how heavy the chain would be. Arun didn't mind. He liked the idea that no one would realize it wasn't steel. I'm doing this in so many parts. We bought the raw platinum in London at a monumental cost. By our second summer in the UK, I was promoted to senior manager, but my salary barely kept up with his wants. I tried to interest him in teaching a local group yoga class, and though we set up a website and rented a community hall, he gave up after the first orientation session. Only a handful of people had shown up, and it wasn't worth his time. I finally suggested he volunteer at one of the charity shops he enjoyed so much. He agreed, probably to appease me, and returned from his first day with a down duvet that couldn't be sold. By his second day, he quit, or was let go. He had said the elderly white woman who worked there didn't like him and had reprimanded him for stuffing his pockets with donations. I was so despondent at the quick end of his voluntary work that I didn't even pause to think about what he had done, how he had brought it upon himself. On 9/11, he was sitting at home watching On 9/11, he was sitting at home watching television when the Twin Towers were blown up. He greeted me with the shocking news on my return from work, and along with the rest of the world, I reeled at the loss of life and massive destruction in my city. Helpless and far from home, I felt a surge of desire to return and be with my family. Shortly after, on a weekend afternoon, while we were sitting on the navy leather couch, Arun said, "If I die, I'll stay here. I want to go back to Paris as soon as possible." Shortly after, on a weekend afternoon, while we were sitting on the navy leather couch, Arun said, "I'll die if I stay here. I want to go back to Paris as soon as possible." Though I lived with him and knew how restless and desperate he was, he had never used such strong language. But we had tried Paris already. Would he really be happy there? He was sure of it and recalled how when he was deported from the US, the elders had told him he would someday live in Paris. He hadn't believed them then, but now realized they were right. I brought up the subject of relocation with my North American manager, citing personal reasons this time, as it didn't make sense from the business point of view for me to move back to France. I said I would pay for my own move, but would need the company to offer me a French contract and sponsor my work visa. She heard me out and agreed, but retracted her offer after I questioned my salary conversion. I couldn't believe my stroke of bad luck, and Arun wasn't understanding about the setback. He reiterated his hopelessness about life and pushed me to make alternative immigration plans with Mark, the French lawyer. I felt Arun's sense of urgency, but even if Mark helped us get back into the country, we weren't going anywhere without my job. When it seemed like the original deal couldn't be salvaged, I called on a senior HR colleague who had also become a friend. I explained what had happened with my boss and shared Arun's state of despair, and confided in her something I hadn't even admitted to myself. I think he might ask for a divorce if we don't move as planned. She listened without speaking, then said, "Leave it to me." 3 months later, we were back in Dad's studio. We hired a contractor to give Dad's place a makeover, replace the withered carpet with laminate flooring, remove the tired wallpapers, and paint the walls the apricot Swami color. Our belongings filled the space, clothing on an open double-tiered rack, books behind the crystal doors of a bureau bookcase. On the floor, a low square Japanese tea table and hand-woven wool Tibetan carpets Arun had brought from India. His navy blue mine tomato red, that had traveled with us everywhere. I sat on the blue one and read by the window. It took me a few days to stop hearing the street noise outside Dad's studio as I fell asleep, but within a week, it felt like we had never left, and I put our dim days in the UK behind me. I had my job, and Arun was communicating with Surat on the construction of our house in Rishikesh. Dad and I had reached a truce. After our confrontation over his planned cult intervention, he had backed down. And though he didn't initiate phone conversations, he answered my calls and agreed to let us stay in his studio for a while. As Paris glowed in the spring light and sunshine poured in from the south-facing door window, I felt at peace, buoyed by our return, confident that the worst was behind us. But it never is. Whew. I have to try to get a bunch of this recorded today because I put a book on my book club that does not have an audio option, and I think my book clubbers aren't so happy about that. So hopefully we're going to have this video book done by the 1st of July, and then people can listen/watch it as it meets their fancy. Thanks for hanging out with me while I record. I don't know what's going to happen with this scarf again. It's not working out the way I wanted. Part 3, the yoga school. Chapter 18, our place. I first met Gabriel in my apartment just before we rented it out to cover the mortgage. He was a young man who taught yoga in the city and had been introduced to Arun by the drug dealer. Marveling at her ability to connect people, Arun had told me, "She doesn't do anything herself, but she's a magnet who brings people together." Gabriel's eyes shone with kindness, and he greeted me with a beatific smile. Dark, wavy hair softened the angles of his face. He stood up and proffered a hand adorned with silver rings, wrists wrapped in leather bracelets. Pendants hung from his neck. I shook his hand, noticed his skull ring, and took an immediate liking to him. Arun sat on the opposite end of the L-shaped couch and looked at him with pride. Gabriel teaches yoga every Saturday. His class is always full. The young protege listened with quiet luminosity. He soon made regular visits to our studio when Arun invited him for lunch on Saturdays. The three of us sat on the floor at the Japanese table and ate the spicy dal and rice Arun had prepared in the closet kitchen. When we were done, Gabriel rose without a word, gathered the empty dishes, and washed them under a trickle of water. He was 25 and moved with unencumbered grace. I had turned 29, but felt much older. Arun took him under his wing and initiated him into the practice Agni Yoga, how to cultivate the body's inner heat for health and longevity. Gabriel, in turn, invited him to teach his bohemian friends at a loft where they met on the other side of the city. Arun brought bamboo poles from home and led them into the spine stretches, forward bends, squats, and lunges. The practice appealed to them, and for the first time since he had left India 5 years earlier, he had a following. The drug dealer had made a fortuitous connection indeed. As the months went by, Arun spoke with Surat in increasingly vociferous tones. I gathered from the Hindi I had picked up over the years that there were issues with the build. After one of these heated conversations, Arun said we'd need another 50,000 euros. My chest tightened. How could we be in the same predicament again so soon? He spoke about material cost overruns, but I had only one question. Are you sure that's all we need? He held up his hands, palm facing me, and shook his head. This is it. The foundation and walls are there. All we need now is paint and tiles. Video project. I ignored my bank director's earlier warning and started with him. He hadn't changed his mind. I already told you not to come back asking for more money to invest in India. I will not do it. Undeterred, I found another bank in our neighborhood and met an advisor from there. After reviewing my salary slips and property documents in his glass cubicle, the young associate approved the mortgage on the spot. I was making a very good living by French standards. He didn't ask about other liabilities on the apartment, and I didn't offer the information. Around the same time, Arun saw a listing in the paper for a small studio apartment for sale in the area and suggested we buy it as an investment. The price was attractive and his plan made sense. The same bank offered us a full loan with no deposit. All these investments meant that I had very little to spend on myself, but I was securing my future. I was also lucky that Mom generously bought me clothes whenever I returned to New York. The fact that I had taken possession of the apartment still loomed between us, but after an initial discussion, she had dropped the subject. Even Sabby had commented, "I can see it both ways." We are reading The Secret Practice, My 18 Years on the Dark Side of Yoga by Joelle Temrales. Arun traveled to Rishikesh ahead of me that summer. It was the first time in 4 years that we'd spend a couple of months apart, and though I missed him, I relished the uninterrupted hours reading by the window. I still sought knowledge from books, and with time to concentrate, I made my way through Vasistha's Yoga, a 700-page philosophical text. When I joined him in August, I finally discovered the place he had been building for over a year. A large, U-shaped, single-story brick house in an otherwise modest neighborhood. The master bedroom was huge, twice the size of our studio apartment in Paris. A king-size mahogany bed was framed in a cement alcove on the far wall. He had bought a thick, hotel-quality spring mattress, the best he could find. Beyond the adjoining dressing room was a bathroom large enough to fit a round spa bath and a wide glass sink with crystal fittings. Despite rooftop solar panels, when I tried to fill the bath, only lukewarm water flowed. On the other side of the L were the kitchen, smaller living room, and second bedroom. He had spared no expense. Shiny floor tiles in the master bedroom suite, marble flooring throughout the rest of the house, modern kitchen furnishings, and granite countertops. "It's not what I wanted," Arun commented on the disproportionate layout, but Sarat didn't understand me. "It's really nice," I said. From the roof, I contemplated the curve of the majestic river against the backdrop of the Himalayan foothills, an awe-inspiring panoramic view that alone justified our significant investment. Now that our house was built, I could see that the temple I had noticed on my last visit was outside the boundary wall. Ours. I wanted to ask him about it, but he had done so much with the house, I let it go. One afternoon, close to the end of my visit, he sat with his back straight. I was by his side, and he brought up the widow who had been our former neighbor at the mountain house. She asked me when I would marry her. His eyes searched mine. My jaw dropped. Where did she get that? He shrugged. I don't know. Doesn't she know that you're married to me? The widow's question was too preposterous to consider. How could she possibly interpret Arun's kindness as romantic interest, let alone a marriage offer? She was only a poor, attractive woman on whom he had taken pity. The sweltering humidity of the monsoon weighed the daylight hours, but by evening a breeze rose from the river and night blooming jasmine infused the air. Sitting on the veranda, Arun and I might exchange a word or two, but it wasn't necessary to speak then. It was enough to listen to the trill of the crickets and take in the night. Someday I would retire from corporate work, and we would come home to this unparalleled natural beauty. We would live simply in Europe, to have luxury in India. We had found each other again, and our shared mission had been restored. Everything would be better from now on. During his time in Rishikesh, Arun had invented a new set of exercises, inspired by an electrical board cover left lying on the patio. He stood on the low wooden structure, bent from the waist, and grabbed hold of its front edge. As he pulled himself down, his spine lengthened. The first move spawned a series of assisted standing and seated forward bends. He called it simply board exercises. And on our return to Paris, we practiced together in the small space of our studio. As he had instructed, I sat behind the board, propped one heel on the top of it, and stretched forward so my hands reached the edge. My spine curved like a bow over my leg, and he commented, "Not very flexible for the wife of a yoga teacher." Embarrassed by his assessment, I tugged harder to reduce the gap between my torso and my legs. I thought of myself as his top student, worthy of being his mate, and I didn't want to be seen wanting in any way. In the months since we met, Gabriel became interwoven into our lives. He ate lunch with us every Saturday and felt like Arun's. Our conversation invariably turned to our yoga ambitions, and their connection seemed destined for more. "Why don't you start yoga school together?" I asked Arun one afternoon after Gabriel had left. His answer was quick. "The elders won't let me teach in public." What is happening here with my arm? All my fuzzy yarns are getting tangled together. I was aware that the secret practice could only be handed down from teacher to student, as it had over the centuries. But what about the physical exercises? Surely he could teach those more broadly. By September, Gabriel had found a slot at a martial arts studio for Arun to teach his exercises in the early morning. It was his preferred time of day to practice and seemed like an ideal opportunity. I designed a flyer to advertise the classes, including Gabriel's drawing of a lotus sitting figure reminiscent of the youth Agni Yoga to the world. We named our new venture City Yoga. After a few weeks, Arun only had a few students, and he asked the owner for another slot later in the day. None was available, so he decided to quit. He didn't want to work only to cover the cost of the hall. I had been attending his classes on the days I worked from home, and though I understood his reasoning, I was disappointed by how quickly he gave up. Building a student base would take time. I returned to my earlier vision, a center dedicated to Agni Yoga, and renewed my ask, "Can we open our own school?" His answer was the same. The elders hadn't approved. Somehow, I didn't lose hope and felt sure it was only a matter of time for the elders to review their decision. Someday, Arun would be getting students into a deep practice, Gabriel at his side, teaching his own classes, the clients filling our hall. The future was ours to create. The next time I asked, Arun confirmed the elders had relented and finally given us their blessing. I wasn't surprised. I was elated. The idea of opening our own school was the crowning moment of my 7 years with Arun, a return to the bliss of our early relationship in Rishikesh, the end of our trials in Europe. Not only would the school give him a sense of personal purpose, but we would also contribute to improving the world. We couldn't keep the mental and physical benefits for ourselves. We would share his unique teaching, not its details, but its peace. Arun wanted a space in the commercial district around the Champs-Élysées, where rents were exorbitant. After viewing an office for 6,000 euros a month, I found an internet listing for a ground floor unit close. Cobbled floor would need to be cemented, but the place already had 2 washrooms and a small room behind them, which we could use for massage. It had wide open areas and a high glass ceiling at the back. The rent of 4,800 euros more reasonable, and based on my business plan, we would need an average of 7 students per class to cover our expenses, well within our growth projections. We made our decision on the spot. The property agent offered us a rent-free period of 6 months in exchange for completing the renovations, including building 2 changing rooms with showers. His only additional requirement was a personal guarantee, since we had no prior business record. It was risky to tie my personal assets to the business, but I had to cross this hurdle to bring in our dream life. We signed the lease at his office, and after he congratulated us with a grin on his face, he offered to open a bottle of champagne. We thanked him and declined, then stepped out into a cold December afternoon. I wanted to give Gabriel the news right away and asked Arun to phone him then and there. They exchanged a few words, and then their conversation came to a quick end. What happened? I asked. He sounded groggy. I think I woke him up. I looked at my watch. It was past noon. Didn't he know we were signing today? I imagined him waiting for our call, anxious for the news, ready to meet us at the new place. Arun shrugged. Must have had a late night. Gabriel's reaction didn't stack. We held the keys to a significant new business, major renovations, yet our partner seemed uninterested in joining our celebration and making plans. A sense of foreboding flashed through my mind. Had we misread him? Did he not care that much about our shared venture? But I couldn't linger in those thoughts. I had bet my personal assets on City Yoga's success and needed to focus on the work ahead. Gabriel was probably laid back, that was all. Once he saw the place, it would spark his dormant enthusiasm. Arun found a Pakistani builder in the local French-English magazine and hired him, happy to speak with him in their common language. Within 2 weeks, the cement floor was laid and the changing rooms with showers had been built. Then, when it was time to move on to the internal work, laying floor tiles and painting the walls, the builder and his team were nowhere to be found. Arun spent hours chatting over the phone about the problems he was causing. I had poured all of my savings, 50,000 euros, into the renovations, but we still ran out of funds, and I applied for a short-term bank loan to complete the work. When I spoke with Dad about our plans and the loan I had secured for an additional 25,000 euros, he said, "I can lend you the money, don't borrow it." His thoughtfulness and unexpected offer stunned me. After all we had been through around Arun and our recent fight over the apartment, I never expected him to take an interest in my project. "Thank you, Dad. I'll pay you back as soon as possible." We finally opened the doors in City Yoga, which we called school, on the last day of January, a little over a year after moving from the UK. Gabriel taught the maiden class. He was wearing a ribbed undershirt and loose cotton trousers. All in white, his wiry arms bare, he led a small group of students, including me. The floor of the hall was covered in judo mats, which Arun had insisted on as the signature feature of our method, a nod to his martial arts past. Light poured in from the steepled glass ceiling as Gabriel started with a few elements of Agni Yoga, then moved on to the set of Ashtanga sequence he had first learned. At the end, we all sat on the floor in front of him, and he gathered his hands in prayer, casting his beatific smile upon us. A light breeze filtered through the gaps in the ceiling windows. Pigeons pecked the glass, and a chorus of children sounded from a nearby school. As my breath moved in and out of my body, my mind dwelled in the peace of the moment. We did it. We had actually opened our own school. From that day on, Arun and I went to city yoga every morning by 7, opened the carriage doors, and burned a stick of Indian incense. The sweet, penetrating scent permeated the air and bridged the inner space of the school with the outside world. He had chosen orange-yellow floor tiles and apricot paint for the reception area. We had a desk and bookshelf by the back wall and an Indonesian-style teak bench in the center of the reception area. The place conveyed the cheerfulness of an elementary school paired with a touch of Eastern artistry. When we'd been open a week, as we stood by the main entrance looking onto the street, I asked him, "How long do you think we'll be here?" Hands in his pockets, he gazed in the clear daylight. 9 years, 18, 27. As long as this building stands, City Yoga will be here. No, it won't. Okay, I'm gonna take a break. Thanks for hanging out with me while I record stuff.